The border, and I read your WKBN interview. It's a nightmare down there. 9,500 teenagers in February.
Yeah, and February was a 62% increase. I mean, this is really sad, and it's an emergency for sure. In fact, the administration has sent FEMA down there, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So although they say it's not a crisis and not an emergency, it clearly is. And unfortunately, it's not just about the kids. It's also about more families. It's also about more single individuals coming across and more drugs. We now know that the amount of fentanyl coming into the United States, something you and I have talked about a lot, which is the deadliest of the opioids, is mostly coming across the border. Remember when we were working so hard to stop it coming through the U.S. mail system from China? We were successful there only to see it diverted to the border. So there are a number of reasons that we need to tighten things up at the border, including human trafficking and guns, but also this issue of opioids and heroin and crystal meth and other drugs, and then of course the issue of the overwhelming number of people that have rushed to the border because the Biden administration made so many changes in policy.
Now, Jen Psaki addressed this from the White House podium yesterday, Senator. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear what she said. I'll play you just a couple seconds of it, cut number 3.
Well, the situation on the ground is certainly challenging, in part because we inherited a dismantled system that wasn't prepared for processing asylum requests that had left in...
It's Donald Trump's fault. What do you think, Senator?
Well, look, the reason people have rushed to the border is not because Donald Trump dismantled the process to determine whether people are eligible for asylum. It's because they put in place a number of things that changed the dynamic and allowed the traffickers to say that things were going to be better. If you got to the border, you could come into the country. They suspended the border wall construction, as you know. They terminated the border emergency that had been put in place. They announced a 100-day pause in deportations. They rescinded the public health emergency, which is what was allowing the Border Patrol to turn people back under COVID, so-called Title 42. They also abandoned what were called the migrant protection protocols, which is also known as the Remain in Mexico policy, which was working to encourage those who were seeking asylum because they had to wait in Mexico to think, well, the asylum chances aren't that great. If you have to wait in Mexico, you can't come in the United States. Maybe I'll go home, and a lot of people did. They also ended the third country rule, the safe third country rule, and asylum agreements with the Northern Triangle countries, which enabled people to seek asylum in those countries. For instance, if you're from Honduras, you could seek asylum in Guatemala. And of course, they ended the quick adjudications at the border, which were used for asylum. So although there are about 1.2 million claims for asylum still outstanding, the Trump administration had started to adjudicate people as they were coming across, sort of the last people to come in, and that was effective because then people, in the Northern Triangle countries were realizing, well, there'll be an adjudication right away, and only about 15% of the people who are going through the process end up getting asylum. And of course, on day one of his presidency, the president also announced that there would be support for a bill for amnesty. And that's okay, but when you say that, you have to also say, but anybody who is here is going to qualify potentially, but nobody who's coming will qualify. And that wasn't made clear. And so you can imagine how all that combined led to an influx of people coming to the border hoping to get into the United States. And that's exactly what's happening because the numbers are overwhelming. Therefore, people are being sent into the interior of the United States pending their court hearing. And again, 1.2 million backlog, probably a 3-year backlog right now in asylum hearings. And so a lot of these folks are getting what they're told by their traffickers that they would get, which is entry into the United States.
So, Senator Portman, if we take that fact pattern and we apply our U of M legal skills to it, do you think objectively someone without a partisan tint on their glasses would say, objectively, Team Biden wants to encourage people to cross the border?
Yeah, I think that is certainly the effect. And again, I don't think this should be a partisan issue, Hugh. I know it's become one over time, but I think we should look at this in a clear-eyed way. We are a very generous country. We bring more people into our country as immigrants and refugees than other countries around the world, and we support legal immigration. That's who we are. It's part of our fabric. It enriches our country. But illegal immigration, unlawful entry, is not who we are. You know, we're a country of laws. And so I think what we have to do now is to look at this in a very dispassionate way and say, okay, how do we get to a situation where we're not providing this incentive for people to come to the border? By the way, it's a crisis for these kids. You talked about the unaccompanied minors, this massive increase, now 9,500, more than we had in the crisis in 2019, more than in the crisis in 2014. How's this good for them? They're being crammed into detention facilities at Border Patrol stations where the facilities were made for single men at a time of COVID, crammed together. No supervision from people who have experience in dealing with children, because these are Border Patrol agents. They're doing their best. God bless them. But it's not their job. There's no place for them to go because the HHS facilities are overwhelmed, which is where you go after you leave the detention facility. The HHS facilities that are there are also overcrowded. Then the HHS folks are told you've got to farm these kids out to families. Well, the vetting is not going to be the kind of vetting we would all hope for. You know, fingerprints, being sure you're not sending kids out with criminals, which happened, by the way, in Ohio. You remember the case of the kids who were placed with their traffickers.
Yep.
And the traffickers then trafficked them in Ohio, working 12 hours a day, 6-7 days a week on an egg farm in Ohio, underage kids not going to school. So this is sad. It's sad for these kids. So there should be a system in place that says, you know, we are not going to give you the ability to come into the United States and spend a few years waiting for your hearing, maybe showing up for the hearing, maybe not. We think about 50%. The numbers are not good here, Hugh, but about 50% of people do not go through the hearing process. Instead, we're going to ask you to stay in your country, and if you have an asylum claim, apply for it there, or apply for it in a third country if you're afraid to do it in your own country, and we'll process that asylum claim. But don't come to the border and be able to walk into the United States. And I think that is the fair and humane thing to do.
Now, Senator, you're ranking member on Homeland Security, and you previously chaired it. There have been reports that very suspect characters on the terrorist watch list have been arrested at the border. 4 Yemenis, I believe an Iranian. Have you confirmed those reports? Are you concerned about that aspect as opposed to the humanitarian disaster, the national security disaster?
I am, Hugh, and I'm told by some pretty good sources that just this year alone there are individuals who have come from 54 different countries. So for those who say this is just about the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, people are coming in from Eastern Europe, people are coming in, as you indicate, from the Middle East, because they see this opportunity now. Remember, when the Border Patrol is taking care of the 9,500 unaccompanied kids, they're not out on the border helping to stop the fentanyl from coming, but also stopping, you know, the really bad actors who are trying to get in to cause us harm. And so I do have a concern about that. And I don't have confirmation of the exact number of people or where they're from. I've heard the reports about people on the watch list, terror watch list this week, in fact, coming in. I'm heading to the border tonight. I will be there and tomorrow as well, and have the opportunity to ask some of those questions very directly.
Now, Senator, I want to switch, because last year you and Senator Peters passed the State and Local Government Cybersecurity Act. And the states just got a whole bunch of money. Our mutual friend David Yost is suing the federal government because it came with a string attached that's unconstitutional. You can't use the money and cut taxes. But I'm thinking that big bucket of money, the states, if they're alert, can go and strengthen their cybersecurity networks. They can repair their grids. Do you think there's any chance that the states are aware of their need to act in a proactive way like you outlined last year?
Well, you know, you raise a really good point, and I'm just writing down an idea, which is we should communicate to all the governors as to the potential use of those funds. I hate to see that money wasted. As you know, I voted against the package because I thought it was wasteful, and I think the $1.9 trillion, most of which will not be spent this year, by the way, so how is it about COVID? But the $1.9 trillion could be used for much more productive reasons, and one would be to provide more protections against these cyber attacks. We have a hearing on it today, actually. SolarWinds, which is what they call the most recent attack, is the most massive cyber attack in the history of the country, and it affected private companies as well as federal agencies. We know it affected at least a dozen federal agencies. You can imagine the kind of information that these individuals were trying to get. This was probably a Russian-backed group from what we understand. But absolutely, the states are vulnerable. And frankly, government needs to work more with the private sector to be able to push back, because that expertise is not all found in government. And so that's something I would encourage as well. But that's a great use of these funds.
Oh, it's so much money. Chris Christie was just on, said New Jersey's going to waste their $6 billion. I don't know how much the Buckeye State's going to get, but if you didn't spend anything on defense, maybe we can expand shipyards. State governors who are on top of this can expand shipyards. They can expand cybersecurity. They can harden their electrical grids. They don't have to waste the money, right?
Right. They do not have to waste it, and there are a number of permissive purposes like that would be good. Ohio has been talking about using it to expand broadband into areas of the state, mostly southeast Ohio, that don't have the infrastructure. And, fast broadband internet is a good idea, because we do want to encourage telehealth and telelearning and teleworking, and you can't do that in parts of Ohio. So, that's a good thing to do. I still think it would have been far better for us to focus on, if that's the issue, how to get the money to the states in an appropriate way for that issue, rather than just providing this funding that for many of the states they just don't need. Some states actually have a surplus, as you know. I'm told California is likely to get about $27 billion despite that. So it really is too bad, because this is hard-earned taxpayer money. It's also precious in a time when we have record debt and higher deficits than we've ever had in our history. And I think this is an opportunity for some of these states to use it more productively, but much better would have been for us to, if we were to legislate on that, legislate specifically in those areas.
You're a former director of OMB. We have to have you back to talk about this. People have no idea how much money this is, and how it's going to overwhelm the state's capacity to actually spend it. There's going to be so many cylinders. Senator Rob Portman, great to speak with you. Good luck at the border today. I appreciate all the time.
Good to talk, as always.
Thank you, sir. ReliefFactor.com. Funny he remembers the barristers.